Rian was an ordinary man who loved the peace of the forest. Whenever life in the city became too loud, he packed his small backpack, took his hiking boots, and went into the mountains for a quiet weekend. He liked the smell of trees, the sound of wind, and the feeling of being far away from everything. But this time, things did not go as he planned. He had come to the northern hills, an area famous for its beautiful trails. The weather had been clear when he started early that morning, but by afternoon the sky had turned gray. The air became cold, and a thin fog started to cover the forest. Ryan checked his map and compass, trying to stay on the marked trail, but the fog made it hard to see. After some time, he noticed that the trees around him looked unfamiliar. The small stones and fallen logs that were supposed to mark the path had disappeared. He stopped and looked around carefully. Every direction looked the same: tall pine trees, thick roots, and a carpet of brown leaves. Ryan took a deep breath and tried not to panic. He told himself that he only needed to turn back the way he had come. But after 10 minutes of walking, he realized he was even more lost. The forest was quiet except for the crunching of his boots on the frozen ground. He took out his phone, but the screen showed no signal. The battery bar was red and blinking. He sighed and turned it off to save the little power left. His watch told him it was already 4 in the evening. The sun was sinking behind the mountain and the air was getting colder. Rian looked through his backpack. He had 1 bottle of water, a flashlight, a lighter, and a small packet of nuts. It was not much, but it could help him survive the night if he had to stay outside. He zipped up his jacket and began to move downhill. He knew that water always flowed toward the valleys, and human homes were often near water. The deeper he went, the darker it became. The fog grew thick again and small snowflakes started to fall. He rubbed his hands together and kept walking. The trees around him seemed to close in, their tall shadows stretching across the white snow. After nearly an hour of walking, Ryan's legs began to ache. He could no longer hear birds or wind, only the faint beating of his own heart. He paused, leaned against a tree, and looked around. That was when he saw a faint orange light flicker in the distance. His first thought was that it might be a reflection, but the glow was steady. He stared at it for a moment. It looked like the warm light of a fire shining through the fog. Hope filled his chest. Maybe it was a ranger's cabin, or maybe some campers had made a fire. He started walking faster, following the glow. The snow became thicker and branches brushed against his jacket. He tripped once, fell to his knees, and quickly stood up again. The light was getting brighter. Finally, the forest opened into a small clearing and Ryan stopped. In front of him stood a wooden cabin, small and old but strong. Smoke rose slowly from its chimney and yellow light flickered through the window. Ryan felt both relief and caution. Someone was there, and that meant warmth and maybe help. He stepped forward, his boots crunching the snow. "Hello?" he called out. His voice echoed through the quiet night. No answer. He tried again, louder this time. "Hello, is anyone there?" Still nothing. Rian walked closer until he reached the small porch. The wooden steps creaked under his weight. He knocked on the door. It moved slightly with his touch, as if it had been left unlatched. He hesitated for a moment. The forest behind him looked dark and endless. The cold air bit his skin. He took a breath and pushed the door open. Warm air met his face. Inside, a fire burned brightly in a stone fireplace, filling the room with orange light. The cabin looked tidy. A wooden table stood in the middle with a lantern and a metal cup. A thick coat hung over the back of a chair. A blanket was folded neatly on a small bed in the corner. Rian stepped inside slowly. The floor creaked under his boots. "Hello?" he said again. "Sorry, I was lost. I just need shelter." No one answered. He closed the door to keep the cold out. The warmth of the fire felt good, but the silence made him uneasy. Someone had clearly been here very recently. The fire was strong, not weak or dying. The cup on the table looked freshly used. There was even a small puddle of melted snow near the door, as if someone had entered just a short while ago. He took off his gloves and rubbed his hands near the fire. Then his eyes fell on the table again. Beside the cup lay a piece of folded paper. It looked clean, not dusty like the rest of the furniture. He stepped closer and picked it up. The note was written in neat handwriting. The ink was dark and fresh. His fingers trembled as he unfolded it. The words on the paper read, "If you are reading this, you are not supposed to be here tonight." Ryan frowned. The message made no sense. Was this some kind of joke? He looked around the room again. Everything was quiet. Only the fire made a soft crackling sound. He read the note again, slower this time. There was nothing else written. No name, no date, no signature. Just that one strange line. He set the note down carefully and listened. Outside, the wind howled. Snow brushed against the window glass. He thought he heard something else, a soft sound, almost like footsteps on the snow. Rian's body stiffened. He turned toward the window. At first, he saw only the reflection of the firelight. Then, for a brief moment, he thought he saw a shadow move between the trees. His heart began to beat faster. He took the flashlight from his bag and pointed it at the window. The beam of light hit the glass, but there was nothing there now. Maybe it was just his mind playing tricks on him. He told himself that. He was tired, cold, and scared. His eyes might have imagined movement. Still, he could not shake the strange feeling that he was not alone. He turned away from the window and looked at the fireplace again. The fire burned strong, as if someone had added wood not long ago. Who would light a fire and then leave it burning in the middle of the forest? He thought about leaving the cabin and finding another place to rest, but outside the wind was growing stronger. The temperature was dropping fast. It would be dangerous to stay out there, so he decided to wait. Maybe the owner of the cabin would return soon. He could explain that he was lost and only needed a place to stay for the night. He sat down near the fire and pulled the blanket from the bed around his shoulders. The warmth helped calm his shaking hands. After a while, his eyes began to grow heavy, but he kept thinking about the note. Why would someone leave such a message? What did it mean? He placed the note on the table again and stared at it as the flames danced in the fireplace. Then suddenly he heard a faint knock, not on the door, but on the window behind him. Ryan froze. The sound came again, slow and steady. Knock, knock, knock. He turned his head slowly toward the window, his heart pounding hard in his chest. Outside, through the fog and falling snow, a dark shape was standing just beyond the light, and it wasn't moving. Ryan sat frozen near the fire. His body did not move, and his breath came in short, quick bursts. The sound came again. 3 soft knocks on the window. He turned his head slowly toward the glass, afraid of what he might see. Outside, the snow was still falling, and a thin layer had already gathered on the windowsill. The firelight flickered on the window pane, making it hard to see clearly, but he could just make out a dark shape standing among the trees. It looked tall, still, and quiet. The shape did not move or make any sound. Rian blinked and rubbed his eyes. Maybe it was only a tree. Maybe the shadows and firelight had mixed together to fool him. He stood up carefully, trying to convince himself that he was safe. He walked to the window and looked closer. There was nothing there now. Only white snow, black trees, and darkness. He let out a slow breath and stepped back. His heart was still beating fast. He tried to laugh a little at himself, though it sounded weak and nervous. "I'm just tired," he whispered. "That's all?" He went back to the chair and sat down again. The fire burned bright and warm, but now it no longer made him feel safe. The note on the table caught his eye again. The same strange words. "If you are reading this, you were not supposed to be here tonight." He picked it up again, turning it over to check the back, but it was blank. No sign of who had written it or when. He wondered if it was meant as a warning or a trick. Suddenly, a loud gust of wind hit the cabin, making the wooden walls groan. Snow slapped against the windows and the chimney made a low howling sound. The lights from the fire flickered. Rian added more wood to the fire and tried to stay calm. He looked around the cabin again, studying every small detail. There was an old clock hanging on the wall, its hands frozen at 7. A few dusty books were stacked on a shelf near the bed. A rusty lantern hung from a nail beside the door. Everything looked ordinary, but he could not stop the feeling that something was wrong. He took out his phone and turned it on again. Still no signal. The battery was almost gone. He used the flashlight to check under the bed and behind the furniture just in case. Nothing unusual, only silence. The snowstorm outside was getting stronger. Ryan decided that leaving the cabin now would be foolish. He pulled the blanket tighter and sat down near the fire once more. The warmth made him sleepy, but fear kept his eyes open. He tried to think of a plan. If morning came and the storm stopped, he would follow the direction of the light back to the trail. Maybe he could find help or reach the road. As he sat and thought, a new sound reached his ears. Soft footsteps on the porch outside. Ryan's heart skipped a beat. The sound was clear this time, steady and slow. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Someone was walking right outside the door. He stood up quickly, his legs shaking. He stared at the door. The footsteps stopped. For a few seconds there was complete silence. Then came another sound. The handle of the door moved slightly. Ryan's hands turned cold. He took a deep breath and whispered, "Hello? Who's there?" No reply came, but the handle stopped moving. He waited for a moment, every muscle in his body tense. Then he took a few steps toward the door and placed his hand on the wooden surface. The fire behind him flickered, casting long shadows across the floor. After a long pause, he slowly opened the door. The cold air rushed in. Snow swirled around him. He looked outside, shining his flashlight across the clearing. There was no one there, only his own footprints in the falling snow. He stepped onto the porch, scanning the trees. The forest stood silent. The shape he had seen earlier was gone. Something caught his eye near the edge of the porch, another piece of paper half buried in the snow. He bent down and picked it up. The paper was damp but still readable. The handwriting was the same as the first note. It said, "Do not leave the cabin. It is safer inside." Ryan's chest tightened. The first note told him he should not be here. Now this one warned him not to leave. Who was leaving these notes and when? He looked around again, but there was no sign of anyone. He quickly went back inside and shut the door. He locked it this time and pushed the chair against the handle. He sat down, breathing heavily, and read both notes together. "You were not supposed to be here tonight. Do not leave the cabin. It is safer inside." He could not make sense of them. Were they written by the same person? Were they meant for him or someone else? He tried to think logically. Maybe this cabin belonged to a forest ranger who left messages for visitors during bad weather. Maybe there were bears or wolves outside, and safer inside was simply a warning. But then why say he was not supposed to be here? Hours passed slowly. The fire burned lower, and Ryan added more wood to keep it alive. Every sound made him jump. The wind, the crack of ice, the groan of wood. His eyes kept moving to the window. At one point he thought he heard faint whispering outside. It was soft and distant, almost like the wind carrying voices. He stood up and listened carefully, but the sound faded away. He sat again, clutching the blanket tightly around his shoulders. The warmth of the fire touched his face, but his back felt cold. He decided to stay awake until morning. Sleep would be dangerous now. He looked at the clock again, the hands still frozen at 7. He checked his watch. It showed 11:40. Time was moving, but the clock was not. He stared into the flames, trying to calm his mind. His thoughts grew heavy and his eyelids began to close. For a few minutes he drifted into light sleep. Then he woke suddenly. A soft sound came from the other side of the room. It was small but clear, like a chair leg scraping across the floor. Ryan sat up straight. The firelight flickered across the walls, casting shadows that seemed to move. He waited, listening. The sound came again, closer this time. He picked up the flashlight and shined it toward the sound. Nothing. The chair and table were in the same place. But then he noticed something new. The notes that had been on the table were gone. He blinked, confused. He looked around the floor under the chair near the fireplace. Nothing. They had vanished. He took a step back, his heart thumping hard. He turned toward the bed and saw something lying on the pillow, the same 2 notes neatly folded together. Ryan's hands shook as he picked them up again. A third note had been added, written in the same neat handwriting. It said, "Stay by the fire." Do not turn around. Ryan felt his breath stop. The fire crackled behind him, throwing orange light on the walls. His body froze. Every part of him wanted to turn and look, but his mind screamed not to. He stood there holding the paper, feeling the heat of the fire on his back, and then from behind him, he heard the sound of slow breathing, close and deep, coming from right next to the fire. Ryan stood still, his breath tight in his chest. The sound behind him was clear now, slow and steady breathing. It was not his own. Someone or something was near the fire. He gripped the note tightly in his shaking hands. The words were still fresh in his mind. "Stay by the fire. Do not turn around." He wanted to turn to see who was there, but fear held him in place. The breathing continued, calm and deep, as if whoever it was had been sitting there for a long time. The fire popped softly and shadows danced on the walls. Ryan's mind raced. He thought of all the reasons why someone would be inside this cabin. Maybe the cabin owner had returned and was sitting quietly by the fire. But if that was true, why did they not speak? Why had they not come through the door? He took a slow step forward, still facing the door. "Who's there?" he said, his voice trembling. There was no answer. Only the sound of the flames and the same quiet breathing. He said again, louder this time, "Please, I'm lost. I don't want trouble. I just need help." The breathing stopped. Silence filled the cabin. Ryan could hear the ticking sound of melting snow dripping from the roof. Then a voice spoke, soft, calm, and low. "You shouldn't have come here." Ryan froze. The voice sounded close just behind him near the fire. It was not angry, but it carried a strange sadness. He slowly turned his head a little, though fear made his neck stiff. He could not see much, only the edge of the firelight and the shadows dancing on the walls. "Who are you?" Ryan asked. The voice answered after a long pause. "No one stays here anymore." Ryan swallowed hard. "But this cabin? It's warm, the fire's burning. Someone must have been here." The voice sighed as if tired. "The fire always burns, that is the problem." Ryan felt cold despite the heat. He turned quickly, shining his flashlight toward the fire. The chair by the hearth was empty. The blanket that had been folded before was gone. The fire burned brightly, but no one sat beside it. He spun around the room, checking every corner. There was no one. "Where are you?" he shouted. The voice came again from behind him this time, though he could not see anyone. "Do not fear. You are not in danger yet." Ryan took a step back. "Yet?" he repeated. "What do you mean?" But the voice did not answer. He stood still for several minutes, waiting, but the only sound now was the crackling fire. Slowly, he lowered his flashlight. Maybe his mind was playing tricks again. Maybe exhaustion was making him hear things that were not real. He sat down near the fire, still shaking. He tried to think clearly. The notes, the knocks, the voice. Maybe they were all part of the same thing. Maybe this place was not as simple as it looked. He pulled the notes from his pocket and laid them on the table again. He studied them in the light. The handwriting looked older than before, as if the ink had faded. The paper edges had curled slightly, as if time itself had touched them. Suddenly, he noticed something new. At the bottom of the first note, faintly written in smaller letters, was another line. It had not been there before. It said, "The fire must not go out." Ryan's heart sank. He turned toward the fireplace. The flames danced brightly, but now they seemed almost alive. He thought he saw faint shapes in the fire, shadows moving within the flames like figures trapped behind glass. He rubbed his eyes. "No," he whispered, "this can't be real." He stood up and reached for the fireplace tools. He lifted the poker and stirred the logs. Sparks flew into the air. For a moment he thought he saw a face form in the firelight. Not clear, but enough to make him step back. He stumbled against the chair and sat down heavily, breathing fast. His hands were cold again, even though the room was warm. He looked at the window. Snow was still falling, covering the glass in white patterns. The wind howled outside, but inside everything was still. He spoke to himself quietly. "Morning will come. I'll wait till morning. Then I'll leave this place." He stared at the fire to keep himself awake. But after hours of silence and warmth, his eyes began to grow heavy. Slowly, he drifted into sleep. When he woke, the fire was almost out. Only a few glowing embers remained. The air had turned cold again. His body was stiff from sitting in the chair. Ryan jumped up quickly and grabbed a few logs from beside the fireplace. As he was about to add them to the embers, a soft whisper came from behind him. "Don't let it die." The voice was so close it made him drop one of the logs. He spun around, but again, no one was there. He threw the wood into the fireplace and used the poker to stir the coals. Flames rose again, bright and strong. He sat down slowly, staring at the fire. His heart was beating fast. He didn't understand what was happening, but one thing was clear. The fire had to stay alive. He thought about leaving again, but the second note's warning echoed in his mind. "Do not leave the cabin. It is safer inside." Maybe that was true. Maybe something outside was worse than what was inside. He went to the window and looked out. The snow had stopped and the forest looked still and calm. The sky was turning light gray, showing that dawn was near. He felt a small bit of hope. If he could just hold on until morning, maybe everything would make sense. He turned away from the window and froze. There, on the table, lay another note. He had not heard anyone enter, and the door was still locked. The paper was folded neatly like the others. His hands trembled as he opened it. It said, "You are keeping the fire alive. That is good. But now you must listen." Below that line there was more writing. "The cabin keeps you safe, but not forever. The one outside waits for the fire to die. It comes when the light fades. Do not let it in." Rian felt a chill crawl down his spine. He looked at the door, then at the windows. Everything was quiet, but he suddenly felt watched again. He held the note near the firelight, reading it over and over. The words seemed impossible, yet everything around him told him they were true. He remembered the shape he had seen in the snow, the knocks on the glass, the sound of footsteps. Something was indeed outside, waiting. He added more wood to the fire and sat with his back to the wall so he could see the door and windows at the same time. The minutes passed slowly. The light outside grew brighter as the morning arrived. At last sunlight touched the snow through the window. Ryan stood up and smiled weakly. The fire still burned and daylight filled the cabin. He had made it through the night, but when he turned to the table again, his smile faded. The last note was gone. In its place was a new one. Written in the same hand with fresh dark ink, it said, "The morning does not mean safety. It only means you have one more day to keep the fire alive." Ryan stared at it, unable to move. He turned toward the window again, and there, standing at the edge of the forest, was the same dark shape from before. Only this time, it was closer. Ryan stood still, staring through the window. The morning light fell softly across the snow, bright and cold. The dark shape at the edge of the trees stood unmoving. It looked tall, its outline sharp against the white forest. For a long time, neither Rian nor the figure moved. He felt the fire's warmth behind him, but it did not stop the chill creeping up his spine. The last note's words echoed in his mind. "The morning does not mean safety." Ryan took a deep breath and told himself not to panic. The thing outside could be a tree or a trick of light. He rubbed his eyes and looked again, but the shape was still there. It had not vanished this time. He wanted to believe it was only his imagination, but deep inside he knew it was not. Slowly, he moved to the table and picked up the note again, reading the line over and over. "You have one more day to keep the fire alive." One more day? Did that mean he would have to stay another night? He felt weak and tired. His throat was dry and he had very little water left. He had not eaten anything since yesterday. The cabin was warm but empty of food. If he had to stay another night, he would need to find water soon. Rian looked at the door. It was locked and the chair still leaned against it. The voice had told him not to leave. The note had warned him it was safer inside. But now he was not sure what was safer, to stay or to go. He decided to wait for a few hours. Maybe the shape would disappear when the sun climbed higher. Maybe he could leave after noon, find the main trail and reach help before dark. He sat near the fire again and stared at it. The flames danced softly, bright and alive. The fire had burned through the night and still looked strong. It seemed to have a life of its own. After some time, Ryan's eyes grew heavy again, but he forced himself to stay awake. He kept glancing at the window every few minutes. The shape outside was still there. It never moved an inch. By midday, Ryan could no longer sit still. He stood up, took his flashlight, and walked toward the window. He pressed his face close to the glass, trying to see clearly through the glare of sunlight. The figure was gone. He blinked several times, searching the forest, but the dark shape had vanished. Only trees and snow remained. He sighed in relief. "It's gone," he whispered. Maybe it was nothing. He turned around to add more wood to the fire. As he did, a soft sound came from the table, the sound of paper moving. He looked over quickly. A new note was lying there where there had been none before. His heart skipped a beat. He walked toward it slowly. The handwriting was the same as before. It said, "It moves when you don't look. The fire keeps it away." Ryan's hands shook. He looked back at the window again, but there was still nothing there. The forest was empty. He read the note again. "It moves when you don't look." The thought made his stomach twist. If it moved only when unseen, then it could be anywhere now. Closer, maybe even right behind the cabin. He looked at the fire. The flames were still strong, glowing orange and gold. The warmth comforted him, but the words of the note filled him with dread. He stayed near the fire all afternoon, afraid to move too far from it. Every now and then he checked the windows and the door. Everything seemed quiet. Hours passed slowly. The sun began to dip again and the light outside turned orange. As darkness came, Ryan's fear grew stronger. He knew the fire must not die. He added more wood, watching the sparks rise into the air. He felt trapped, but he did not know what else to do. Then, as the last bit of daylight faded, he heard something. A sound came from the window. Not a knock this time, but a soft scraping, like fingernails brushing the glass. Ryan turned quickly, flashlight in hand. He pointed it toward the window. For a second, he saw something. A face pressed against the glass. Pale, still, watching him. He dropped the flashlight in shock. The light rolled across the floor, making strange shadows on the walls. When he picked it up again and shined it back at the window, the face was gone. Ryan's breath came fast and rough. His hands trembled as he backed toward the fireplace. The fire hissed softly as if alive. He stared into it, trying to calm down. The shadows flickered on the walls, moving like waves. He sat down in front of the fire, clutching the blanket around his shoulders. "It's okay," he whispered to himself. "Just keep the fire alive. Just stay awake." Minutes passed, then hours. The night outside grew darker. The snow began again, falling thick and quiet. Ryan tried to stay awake, but exhaustion dragged his eyes down. His head nodded once, twice. Then he fell asleep sitting up. When he woke, the fire had burned low again. Only small flames flickered among the blackened logs. The cabin was cold. He hurried to add more wood. His hands shook so badly that one log slipped and rolled across the floor. As he picked it up, something caught his eye. Near the door, where the snow had blown in through a small crack, there were footprints. Wet, dark footprints. Ryan froze. He followed the marks with his eyes. They led from the door to the table, then to the bed, and finally to the chair where he had been sitting. He stepped back quickly, heart pounding. "No," he whispered. "That's not possible." The door was locked. He looked again. The footprints were already fading, as if drying on the wood. He grabbed the poker and pushed more wood into the fireplace. The flames rose higher, filling the room with orange light. For a moment, he felt safer again. Then he saw it. Another note on the floor near the door. He picked it up with shaking hands. The handwriting was still the same, neat and dark. It said, "You fell asleep. Do not fail again." Ryan dropped the note. His chest felt tight. Whoever or whatever was leaving these messages knew everything he was doing. He ran to the window and looked outside. The forest was empty again, but this time the dark shape was standing closer, only a few steps from the porch. Ryan's breath caught in his throat. The figure was tall and thin, its outline faint but real. It did not move. He stepped back slowly, keeping his eyes on it. The fire crackled behind him, and the light from it seemed to push the darkness away from the window. The figure stayed still for a moment, then turned slowly and vanished into the trees. Ryan stood by the window for a long time, staring at the place where it had been. The snow fell heavier now, hiding all tracks. He finally went back to the fire and sat down. His hands were cold even though the fire burned bright. He knew now that he could not sleep again. He had to keep the flames alive no matter what. As he sat there staring at the fire, he whispered, "I just have to make it through one more night," but deep down, he no longer believed that one more night would be the end. He looked at the clock on the wall. The hands were still frozen at 7, just like before. The time in this place did not seem to move normally. He turned back to the fire and saw something that made his blood run cold. In the center of the flames, shapes were forming again, shapes that looked like faces, hundreds of them flickering in and out of sight. Their mouths opened and closed, but no sound came out. Ryan covered his eyes. "No, stop," he whispered. "I can't take this." The fire flared suddenly, brighter than ever, lighting the whole cabin in gold. When he looked again, the faces were gone. On the table, a final note waited for him. It said, "You are part of it now. Keep the fire alive or it will take your place." Ryan's hands trembled as he read the words. The fire crackled behind him, and outside the wind began to rise again. He looked once more at the window. The shape had returned, closer than before, almost at the door. And as the flames flickered, Ryan realized that the figure outside looked exactly like him. Ryan stood frozen in front of the fire. The wind howled outside, shaking the wooden walls of the cabin. His eyes stayed fixed on the window where the dark figure stood. It was clearer now, tall, with the same build, same face, same tired eyes. It looked exactly like him. His reflection? No, the movement was wrong. It didn't copy him. It just stood there, watching. Ryan's heart pounded hard in his chest. His hands were shaking, his skin cold despite the fire's heat. He backed away slowly, his gaze never leaving the window. The figure did not move closer, but he could feel its eyes following him. He whispered, "What are you?" But the wind outside swallowed his voice. The fire popped loudly, making him flinch. Sparks flew into the air. The flames grew brighter, for a moment, and when he looked back at the window, the figure was gone. He waited, holding his breath, listening. Only the storm's wild voice answered. Ryan turned to the table, hoping for another note. Each note had given him warning or instruction. Maybe there would be one now to explain what was happening. There was nothing there. The table was empty except for the old papers and a half-burned candle. He felt a strange mix of fear and anger. He didn't understand why this was happening to him. All he had wanted was shelter. Now he was trapped in some nightmare he couldn't escape. He walked toward the door and listened. The storm was stronger than before. The snow outside hit the walls like sand. He whispered to himself, "If I run now, maybe I can find help before night ends." But then he remembered the note. "Keep the fire alive, or it will take your place." Take his place. What did that mean? He turned back to the fire and stared at the flames. They flickered softly, dancing in patterns that almost looked like faces again. He shook his head. "No, I'm not part of this. I'm going home." Grabbed his coat and backpack and pushed the chair away from the door. The sound of wood scraping the floor echoed through the cabin. He unlocked the door and opened it slightly. The wind rushed in, icy and wild. Snowflakes swirled inside the cabin. He raised his hand to shield his face. The cold air hit him like a wall. He took one step outside. The snow reached almost to his knees. The forest was dark, the trees swaying under heavy snow. Behind him, the fire crackled loudly, as if protesting his choice. The warmth behind him felt alive, like a heartbeat. Then faintly, through the storm, he heard a whisper, "Don't leave." Ryan froze. The voice was soft but clear, close like it came from inside the cabin. He turned quickly, but no one was there. The whisper came again, louder this time. "Don't leave!" He looked around the room in panic. The fire burned brighter, the flames twisting like they were trying to form shapes again. He could almost see eyes in them, glowing eyes watching him. He stumbled backward toward the open door. "Stay away," he shouted. But the fire only roared louder, flames reaching higher up the chimney. The wind pushed against the open door, slamming it shut with a hard thud. Ryan rushed toward it, trying to open it again, but the handle was ice cold and stiff as if frozen. He pulled hard, but it would not move. The firelight filled the cabin, bright and golden, casting long shadows across the floor. He turned around slowly, fear building in his chest. There was something new written on the wall above the fireplace, words burned into the wood. "You belong to the fire." Ryan shook his head. No, I don't." He backed away, heart racing. "You can't have me." The flames hissed and grew even higher, almost touching the ceiling now. The sound was like a deep breath, in and out, as if the fire itself was alive. Then he saw movement near the bed. Another figure was standing there, not the shadow from outside, but something clearer. It was him again. Same face, same clothes, same tired eyes, but this one was smiling. Ryan gasped and stepped back until his back hit the door. "What are you?" he whispered. The figure didn't speak. It took one slow step forward, then another. Its smile never changed. The light from the fire flickered across its face, showing that its eyes were bright gold, like burning embers. Ryan looked around desperately for something to defend himself. He grabbed the metal poker from beside the fireplace and held it in front of him. "Stay away," he shouted. The figure stopped walking. Its smile faded slowly. Then it spoke for the first time, its voice sounding exactly like Ryan's own. "You were never supposed to find the cabin." Ryan felt his throat tighten. "What do you mean?" The figure tilted its head slightly. "The cabin finds those who are lost. It keeps them warm, but warmth always has a cost." The words sent a chill through Ryan's body. "No, I just needed help. I didn't ask for this." The figure's eyes glowed brighter. "You came in. You lit the fire. Now you must feed it." Ryan shook his head violently. "I won't." The fire behind him roared louder, sparks flying out onto the floor. The cabin walls creaked under the pressure of the heat. The figure raised a hand and pointed toward the fire. "You must choose. Let it die, and it will take you. Keep it alive, and you stay forever." Ryan's breath came fast and rough. He turned to look at the fire. It was bright and powerful, but deep inside the flames, he saw faces again. Faces of other people, their eyes open, their mouths moving in silent screams. He realized then what the fire truly was. It wasn't just warmth, it was a prison. And every soul that kept it alive was trapped inside it forever. Ryan turned back to the figure. "No, I won't stay." The figure's expression changed. It looked almost sad. "Then it will take you." The fire suddenly dimmed. The light faded fast and cold darkness rushed into the room. The warmth vanished. Ryan could see his breath in the air. He tried to run to the door again, but his legs felt heavy, like the air itself was pulling him back. The figure moved closer, its glowing eyes now the only light in the room. Ryan screamed and threw the poker at it, but the metal passed right through and hit the wall. The figure stepped closer until it stood only a few inches away. It reached out a hand and touched Ryan's chest. The touch burned like fire. Ryan gasped. His vision blurred. The room started to spin. The last thing he saw before he fell was the fire flaring back to life, bright and strong. When he opened his eyes again, everything was quiet. The cabin was warm. The fire burned calmly in the fireplace. He looked around. The same room, the same table, the same bed. Everything looked peaceful again. He tried to move, but his body felt strange, light, almost hollow. He walked to the window and saw the forest covered in new snow. Everything was calm. Then he saw movement outside. A man was walking through the trees, struggling in the snow, calling for help. Ryan's heart sank. He looked down at his hands. They were faint, almost transparent like smoke. He turned to the fire. It burned bright and steady. The heat no longer felt warm. It felt like home. On the table, a new note had appeared. It said, "Welcome, Keeper. The fire will never die." Outside, the lost hiker saw the small cabin and hurried toward it. Smoke rose from the chimney, and a soft light glowed through the frosted window. Inside, Ryan watched silently as the door opened. A stranger stepped in, shivering, whispering, "Thank God someone's here." The fire crackled softly, and in the light of the flames, Ryan smiled faintly.